Hey, what's up, everybody? John Odermatt here, host of Felony Friday. And did you know that we have a weekly show dedicated to sports and gambling and telling ridiculous stories? It's not a public show. It's behind our paywall in the Lions of Liberty Pride. It's called Degenerate Gamblers. It is myself and Brian McWilliams and the elusive legal counsel of the Lions of Liberty, Rico. And every week on Degenerate Gamblers, we review what's going on in college football, pro football. Maybe we talk a little bit of playoff baseball, not much though. But more importantly, we tell ridiculous stories from our daily lives and from our past. So in order to get access to that, you got to join the Lions of Liberty Pride. You can go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty to get access.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, welcome back to another edition of Felony Friday, a weekly show here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. This is not the only show on Lions of Liberty. If this is your first time, if you stumbled across this podcast, you're like, what the heck am I listening to? This is a bit of a variety show. We kick off every week, every Monday, with a show hosted by Mark Clare. It is mostly an interview style show where Mark brings on different characters in the liberty movement to talk politics, to talk philosophy, to talk all kinds of interesting things. On Wednesday, we have more of a laid-back, off-the-cuff show hosted by Brian McWilliams. Brian, we like to say he brings you your weekly shot of culture, comedy, and liberty. And of course, every Friday, there's a beautiful show right here where I shine a light on the broken criminal justice system. Today's show, we're going to be talking about vaping. What's going on in the vape market, prohibition, all the different things. Is it bad? I mean, I think it is, but let's learn why more prohibition would be worse for the vaping market and less safe. We'll get to that in a minute. I'll introduce my guest in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to let you guys know today's episode, this is the 199th episode of Felony Friday. Oh my God, almost to 200. I can't believe it. That obviously means the show notes page can be found at lionsofliberty.com/FF199. Let's just jump into the show. Let's do it. My guest today on Felony Friday is Randal Myer. Randal is the executive director for the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce. Previously, Mr. Meyer served as a legislative counsel to Senator Rand Paul before entering private practice as a litigator and lobbyist in a top D.C. firm. His work on the topics of cannabis and criminal justice reform have been published widely in such outlets as the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, New York Post, San Francisco Chronicle, National Law Journal, and Newsweek. Randal, welcome to Felony Friday.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on the show. And I reached out to you, I don't know, a couple days ago. I saw a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle that you and your colleague at the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce wrote, you and Jason Beck, who's the founding director and vice president there. And really it's centered around something that I think it's a really important topic right now. I think there's a lot of misinformation with regards to the vaping and what's dangerous, what's not, and all that stuff. And I want to get into really the details of that article, the stuff you explained, the different resources that were cited. But before we do that, I think it's good for my audience to get to know you a little better and get to know about your background. So if you could just start out by kind of sharing with us, what got you interested, first of all, in cannabis?
Sure. So I kind of first approached it from an academic side. I could not understand this disunity between what is rational policy and what actually exists as policy at the federal level. Because cannabis is the safest adult use substance on the face of the globe today. Medicinally, there's thousands of years of recorded use and study on it to show that there are medical benefits. Yet the federal government since 1937 has taken this prohibitionist stance towards cannabis and allowed no research and has only had a negative association with the product. So when I was in law school and when I was an undergrad, I got more into researching exactly how this occurred, did some independent study on it, and it was just frustrating because there was no good reason for the policy to exist as it is. In fact, if you go back to the congressional debates in 1937 and look at the argument over whether or not cannabis should have been legal or not, the legislators clearly did not understand what they were legislating about. And the only real discussion was over whether or not such a bill should have been brought up so late in the day with no one understanding what the bill was about. And then someone just mentioned it was about drugs, so they passed it. It's incredible because it seems like it's this strange mistake that governments just can't admit to and correct in a reasonable way and really dive into that thing. And the consequences, not only on the industrial side, the loss of billions of dollars a year to the economy, but also on the criminal justice side, we're talking tons of lives, tons of years and decades of enforcement priorities and everything that have torn away civil liberties in this, because it just seems that there's such a distance that it drew in my interest.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I like how you put that too. It's like this, everyone knows this is a terrible mistake. So many people have been harmed. All the evidence is there. There's not evidence that shows cannabis being dangerous. That's not existing. But at the same time, there were some at the time that cannabis was first prohibited, as you talked about when it was brought up congressionally way back when. There were maybe some crony forces at play, right, with the cotton industry and different things like that.
Yeah, sure. It does appear that some industries were working hand in hand with the federal government to, shall we say, a propaganda campaign against a renamed substance that was known as cannabis. I mean, for example, cannabis was regulated as a medical substance in interstate trade from the original Food and Drug Act of 04 or 07 all the way up until 1937. And then in 1938, it was not part of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act scheme. And now we are where we are today, 80 years later, because we're still living under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act scheme. But up until it became illegal, this was regulated in interstate commerce as a drug by the federal government. There were standard formularies to produce in interstate commerce with labels that have congressional imprints from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia from back in those days. Mm-hmm. And it's just incredible, the flip that occurred there and the lack of medical knowledge, because this was also done over the objections to the American Medical Association in the 30s. The AMA was abundantly clear that cannabis has medical value and medical effects, and it's used in a wide variety of standard formularies back then. Right.
No, it's crazy that we are where we are today, and there's just more misinformation that we seem to get. And that kind of brings us to really the main topic I want to talk about today, and the topic of the article that you and Jason wrote, that really centers around this controversy around vaping, and how dangerous is vaping. We hear that more than 1,000 people potentially have been affected, have had lung issues, have been admitted to hospitals. There's been, I think, 18 deaths that have been cited. That might have changed. I'm not sure. But what is, I guess you can just take us through, like, what is the truth here? What is causing these deaths, and what is dangerous? Is it the vaping that the vapes that people are buying legally, or is it black market merchandise?
So what we're finding evidentially is the primary associated origin of products with this vape-related illness is the illicit THC market. As the New England Journal of Medicine pointed out, doing a survey of a number of cases, about 83% of people who reported to hospitals that they surveyed on these cases had an illicit THC product, or an e-nicotine product of unknown origin that accounted for the other 17%. Now, there's also been a few cases that have been associated with legal products in states, Oregon and Delaware, where there are some concerns over testing standards and such compared to California or other states where phase 3 testing is considered the gold standard of consumer safety. From at least an industry perspective. But the CDC and FDA have warned against vape use, and it's obviously smart to follow the CDC and FDA's warnings on what products to use and liability purpose for everyone's liabilities and safety all around. But the origin of a lot of this stuff and what FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb has kind of put out in his writing as well is these additives and concentrates that you see in the illicit market, such as propylene glycolate, MCT oil, vitamin E acetate is one that's been pretty popular in the news, and any of these additives. The issue is that when you have all of these additives in, they're not something that is nearly a study. You don't know exactly what is safe. And when you're buying from the illicit market, these are not products that are necessarily tested. For example, I think CannaSafe Labs did something with CBS News a bit back where they tested some illicit market cartridges versus legal market cartridges and found that the illicit market cartridges all contained a fungicide that when vaporized turns into cyanide, which is obviously not great for the lungs. But the larger public policy implication here, though, is that cannabis prohibition, like we said in the article, it has deadly effects. If these products aren't regulated, it's the same thing as when you look at these cartridges, it could be snake oil from the illicit market. You don't know what's in there. You do not know what it's been cut with. You don't know what process or testing it's been through, or what the plant was originally done through anyway. So even if you have had some extractor you've known for 10 years, who you think is a safe extractor in the illicit market, you don't know what's been done to the plants that are coming to that extractor or any of those things in the supply chain. And that's all a symptom of prohibition. If having in place the ability to regulate, to have product recall abilities, to know that there is a tested and safe product is an important part of when we're talking about human consumption of goods that are smokable and food. It's important to know we're not getting poisoned. And with these cartridges, it's very difficult. It's not as if you can, simply look at a cart and be like, oh, this is unsafe. I can tell from my eyesight that this contains this particular molecule at this level.
Yeah. You're not going to test it yourself and see if it's safe or not.
Yeah. No, in some states, don't even test when the oil is in the cartridge versus outside of the cartridge. So you don't know if the cartridge could be the problem in testing. And that's part of the patchwork issue that comes around here. With having a federal prohibition. Uniform standardization is really the best solution, which is what we advocate for.
So can you explain what you mean exactly by uniform standardization?
So testing labs throughout the country should be able to test cannabis so the Schedule 1 status makes sure you can't have interstate commerce, it can't have it be legal, and you also can't cross state lines with any of your product for testing. Or to do any of that kind of stuff. So when in a legalized environment, the advantage is that the federal agencies that are responsible for regulating alcohol, such as TTV, or the FDA for regulating food or edibles, would have the ability then to say, this is what testing means in all 50 states. You can go above it, but you can't go below it. You cannot add these things. You cannot test positive for these things anywhere in this country and sell it as a product. The only entity within the country that actually really has the power to prohibit specific additives on a nationwide scale is, of course, the federal government. New York can't tell California, don't add these things. But the federal government can. And what we'd like to, the role that we'd eventually like to see the federal government taking is that role of saying, okay, we know these things are unsafe. No product in any state can contain these unsafe things, and allow the states to develop how they want to, the types of products and the types of the types of supply chain management and the types of tools that they need to actually have a robust interstate trade. It's an interesting tension with libertarian principles too, because obviously you want smart regulation, and it's important. And there's some regulations that have been suggested that aren't as advantageous, such as THC caps that only forces chronic medical patients to consume more cannabis in order to get the same level of effect from CBD or THC, as in you'd have to smoke 25 cigarettes a day instead of 1 cigarette a day to get your right amount of THC or CBD.
So they're limiting the amount of THC that you're able to have in there. And
yeah, and those are ineffective regulations. Mm-hmm. But when you look at things like testing standards for an oil where someone cannot tell what molecules are in there, and when you have a real public safety thing, there is an important role for the federal government. There's a reason it has the Commerce Clause powers, and that's so that it can make interstate trade regular and safe.
Yeah, I guess, you kind of hit on it before, but the hesitancy from a libertarian standpoint is obviously, we've seen in history when the federal government has control over, for example, regulating our food and setting standards there and putting out their food pyramid. Obviously, there were big problems with that, which is played out in, a lot of the health issues that we see in today's society, which has evolved and recommendations have changed. But aren't we really? I understand ideally, obviously, the federal government is going to make the right choices from a regulation standpoint around chemicals and whatnot. But who's to say that they couldn't be corrupted in a certain way where a favored company, for whatever reason, sort of through cronyism, is able to maybe skirt by with different regulations. We see so often with legislation that it's really the biggest players in a marketplace that end up designing the regulation, which can then push out the smaller, more innovative companies. So I don't know if there was a question there.
Oh no, I totally understand the sentiment, and this is actually one of this is a large area of discussion that comes up for us, especially on the trade association side. And the interesting part is, look at the craft brew industry. How advantageous has it been for craft brewers in order to be able to access the internet, to trade across state lines, and to break down those barriers? Small businesses, large businesses. When we're talking about a framework for interstate trade that's clear and that doesn't have a crazy amount of insane regulations in it that don't actually make sense for public safety, that's efficient, that creates a truly robust marketplace. And it's something we don't have in the United States right now for cannabis. We don't have legal interstate trade. And that fundamentally messes with how we can even perceive the economy within the American sphere. Can we think of any other good where you can't transport it across states or sell it across different states, or where your market share in California is limited to the 20 million or so adults that are in the marketplace for those, rather than the 200 million adults in the American marketplace? So there's a unique situation with cannabis where those criticisms kind of fall by the wayside, regardless of the veracity, because of the common interest of all businesses. Schedule I status is an absolute enemy to any size cannabis business. It's a total prohibition. It doesn't matter if you're the largest cannabis business in the world or the smallest person in Oklahoma who just got a license to grow and put your first seeds in. No matter what, the DEA views you the same way.
So, obviously we've seen many states legalize recreationally and medically, but still that Schedule I status federally is a huge problem. When do you think, if you had to, put on your if you had to make a prediction, when do you think we could see that change and see that really the classification change?
I think that I don't want to put a specific time limit on it because this is it's a sensitive area. There is a large education gap because the federal lawmakers haven't been dealing with this issue for a long time. They're just starting to hold hearings on the issue. Their staffs are really starting to learn the issue more deeply and to really pay attention to it because it's been a state problem for a long time rather than a federal problem. So I don't want to put a timeline on it, but I would say that there's been a lot more consensus forming around the idea that descheduling is the right approach. The question is how we deal with the rest of descheduling, such as the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For example, if we deschedule cannabis tomorrow, what legal products exist under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act? I haven't seen a lot of IND applications to the FDA for cannabis products and things like that. So part of it is dealing with incorporating the existing state products and existing state infrastructures to make sure in federal legalization there isn't a huge sweep of the marketplace. So, like, let's say tomorrow descheduling passed. There's just a clean bill that said we deschedule cannabis since no longer in Schedule 1. Every cannabis product on the market is now an adulterated drug in interstate commerce under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, out of the frying pan into the fire. So these larger policy issues are now the stuff that we're starting to work through, and it's going to take some time to work through that at the federal level and to get a real understanding of how to adapt the various kinds of authorities that exist outside of the Controlled Substances Act that affect cannabis in a world where it's not in Schedule 1.
So is this partially what's going on now with the CBD marketplace? Why there's this gray area, even though we had in the Farm Bill, what was that, last December, where hemp was legalized, right? But today we're in this weird sort of in-between space where, sure, you can buy CBD products and oils and all those things. I mean, at my local gas station, I can go in and buy it. I can order it online. Some
all
states
that is illegal.
but yeah, is it? I mean, I guess the FDA could come in and do a raid and shut down the store, right? Or
and they've sent warning letters to a couple of the larger operators. Right now, the FDA is undergoing a rulemaking process to try to see some way to dealing with CBD as a non-drug additive for food. So the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it's a large regulatory bill, but there's a core set of rules and it says you cannot be a drug and also be a food or a cosmetic. It's called drug preclusion. You
can't be a drug and also be a supplement, if something
or
was
food generally.
Yeah, if something was, that's crazy. So is this what's happening with CBD since CBD came onto the marketplace? It's been prescribed for like seizures, right, and all kinds of different medical cases. Yeah, so now they have to like sort of bridge that gap. It can be prescribed, but also if you want to, put some in your smoothie, you can do that too.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue, the tension they're trying to deal with, because Epidiolex went through the drug application process with the FDA. It's an FDA-approved drug, and now there are 5 to 7 years of drug preclusion or whatever there was over. No one else can even produce the same drug, let alone put it into a food instead of a drug. Yes, so the FDA has rulemaking authority that can deal with that, but at the same time, Congress has the power to amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to make a clear process. For example, Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce, we have a model bill that suggests on how to regulate cannabis, and we're actually looking to introduce version 2.0 early next year, updating for all the new changes that we've thought about and dealt with over the last year and feedback we've received. But how we like to deal with the FDA is to follow the same process that was used during 2012 when the FDA realized that nitrogen and laughing gas and those kinds of things were unapproved drugs and ruled them all outside of the approved drug index. So all the nitrogen gas you couldn't use after 2012. Well, Congress passed a bill that said as long as you are producing something in accordance with the United States Pharmacopoeia, the general formulary index for how to produce every drug in the world that we allow to be sold in the United States, then you can just get a certification from the FDA that you comply with pharmacy standards and that product can be sold in interstate commerce. So what we suggest in our bill is to do the same thing with cannabis. Have the pharmacopoeia relist it. It was listed in the pharmacopoeia for 87 years, from 1850 to 1937, and the pharmacist can come up with a proper formulary for fluid extract or cannabis or tincture of cannabis and all of that to provide that kind of framework without disrupting the product significantly, because there's now a set of generics that every company that exists can draw from and then introduce into interstate commerce. That we consider smart, efficient regulation as opposed to, say, making every variation of a vaporizer go through the new drug combination device process or something like that.
Which would be ridiculous.
Yeah. So the FDA stuff is a very interesting set of implications, and it's really important to get it right for public safety. It's critical that we make sure that we are dealing with safe things in interstate commerce, because as we see come up, this inconsistent patchwork scheme among the states just doesn't allow for that regular commerce that we want. The United States is a free trade union of 50 states. That's what we're supposed to be. And the federal government is not allowing that free trade and not providing those smart regulatory conditions to flourish that trade, let alone domestically or internationally.
So you've referenced your bill. Your bill, is this a bill that's backed by the Global Alliance of Cannabis Commerce? Or
yeah, it's our model bill. We've released model legislation for free use for legislators. It can be incorporated into existing descheduling bills, standalone measure. But the idea is to make sure that we have that kind of text and those ideas out there for lawmakers to be grappling with.
Okay. And has there been feedback from lawmakers?
Very positive so far.
Yeah.
From the meetings we've had, it's been very positive. They've obviously come back with questions concerning the complexity of the bill. If you look at it, it's 75 pages. So they're sure going to have.
Is it available for people to read?
Yes, online in our policy center. We also have a section by section analysis, so you can see how it's supposed to work in tandem with everything there in the bill. But yeah, it's been very positively received. It's been positively received by fellow industry advocates and advocates as well. It's seen as a pretty smart solution to the regulatory issues. And we're actually very excited to see more improvements in 2.0 early next year.
Okay. So if you could just give us just like an overview of what is the mission of the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce?
So our goal is to advocate in front of lawmakers and policy professionals to improve the conditions for the cannabis industry for adult and medical use. We're here to legalize and deschedule and to get international trade for the economy up and running. Mexico is going to be legalizing very soon, as we've seen from the news. Canada is already there. We're the only North American trading partner that is not getting in with the cannabis economy. And now that's starting to have more consequences in global trade as we see EU nations legalizing and importing and exporting between England, Germany, Canada, and such.
So is this something, speaking just of overall of descheduling, cannabis legalization, is this something that you could foresee going forward? And I know you've previously worked with Senator Rand Paul. This is a bipartisan issue, right? Is this something you could see really sort of develop quickly? And we talked about time frame. Who knows when it'll happen? But do you think that when it does actually get pushed forward and we get some traction here, that it will be both a Democrat and Republican issue? I know there's political dynamics there that could prevent that, but
I'm sure it'll be bipartisan. The real, politically speaking, it has to be. The Senate, in order to get something done in the United States Senate, you absolutely need 60 votes no matter what. There's not a 60 vote split towards either party on the horizon. So it's no matter what happens, it will be a bipartisan fix to do cannabis.
And what type of, I know we're coming into campaign season here with 2020 quickly approaching. I think pretty much all of the Democratic candidates come out for some form of cannabis legalization. I know Trump, when he campaigned, at least he was saying, leave it up to the states, but not much progress has been made there. What is each side saying? What's their general message been and their interactions with you?
In terms of where it's the presidential shaping up, the Democratic candidates are all there in some form or way, shape, or another for reforming cannabis. The president's position has consistently been to let the states do what the states are doing, and administratively, he's definitely been doing that. For example, under the Bush administration and Obama administrations, there were still some DEA raids of licensed stores in various states. That's not going on now, from what we've heard or been reported to, unless those stores are actually doing something that really, really is wrong. But the administration has pretty much left states to their own devices on this issue, which is more or less consistent with the appropriations measures that Congress has consistently taken since 2014, and pretty much made that the necessary position of the executive. So Trump's been pretty consistent with Congress's salutary neglect of intra-state policy. I'd say the current federal policy is salutary neglect because they've passed the appropriations amendment since 2014 that says you can't prosecute for the state legal cannabis work. So he's generally kept consistent with that, and I don't imagine he'd be inconsistent with that going into the next election cycle.
Yeah, it'll just be interesting to watch, especially once we do get into the general election. If you have a Democratic candidate on stage talking about potentially descheduling and legalization, to see what happens. I mean, I don't know.
I'm excited for that moment. Yeah,
it would be great.
It would be fantastic.
Because at the end of the day, Trump is a populist. At least I think he is. So that could push things forward. But
and cannabis is popular. 2/3 of the country now is in favor of regulating like alcohol, and over 96% is in favor of medicinal use. So there's a lot to be said in terms of polling and those advantages.
Well, it's been amazing. I mean, CBD, just seeing that market, how quickly it has developed, and obviously with young people, that could be predicted. But with people, baby boomers, and who they had the stigma against the cannabis plant, and to see them really accept it, I think is very encouraging.
It is incredible. It's funny. The largest growing sector of cannabis users is the senior citizens and retirees. It's incredible how much they've embraced the medicinal uses of it. It's used as a general analgesic and CBD's effects with arthritis and that sort of stuff. It's just incredible, and it's really been word of mouth and just experiences retaught that generation against the stigma. For example, my parents are in a retirement community in Florida, and they tell me regularly that cannabis use in that community is very, very prominent. And it's just like, oh my gosh.
It's like a college dormitory. Yeah,
even worse. In a college dormitory, you didn't have land to grow the plants on.
It's hilarious.
So it's just incredible the stories you hear out of these retirement communities in Florida nowadays. Other advocates in DC are also sharing very, very similar stories from their parents or grandparents' communities, and some of them have their parents or grandparents getting in it. It's like incredible.
That's so funny.
I had one advocate tell me hey, my mother was a DARE officer when I was in middle school, and now she's treating her arthritis with cannabis.
Hey, that's progress. That's the definition of progress right there. I like it.
Absolutely.
So just before I let you go, Randal, if you could just let my listeners know where they can learn more about you, where they can learn more about the Global Alliance for Cannabis Commerce, and anything else you want to promote.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We are at globalcannabiscommerce.org. You can look us up also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have handles and profiles on all of those. We're regularly updating on industry news and events, as well as what policy measures and steps we're taking. Love being on the show. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to hopefully chatting again soon.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks. Bye.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Randal Myer. I know I did. I learned a ton, and hopefully the Felony Friday audience did as well. This is a very controversial and a very important topic. I think a lot of people are misinformed. A lot of people think that just vaping alone is causing a lot of these lung issues and people to die, when I think digging into the actual facts behind it, you'll find that it's not the vaping itself that is the problem. It is actually the vapes that are coming from the black market, which is caused by cannabis prohibition, which is leading to these severe lung issues and the issues there. What we didn't talk about was the actions that the Trump administration has threatened to take and still plans on taking. The Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar has said the Trump administration plans to continue to go forward with a ban that would remove flavored e-cigarettes from the market. You have companies like Juul coming out and saying that they're going to remove these flavored vaping juices from the market. I've heard online sales. I don't know if Juul is also halting sales, brick and mortar stores. I have no idea. Just a note on that and how ridiculous that is. Obviously, I don't think it's a good idea for kids to be vaping, for young kids to be vaping, for young kids to be smoking cigarettes, for young kids to be chewing tobacco, any of those things. But just to point out a few things, smokeless tobacco, cha, is available in many, many different flavors, from cherry to wintergreen to all these different things. I don't know if there still is. I think there used to be a bubblegum flavor that Skoal had. No one's taken that stuff off the market. That's still right there at the gas station for all the kids to see if they want to somehow get their hands on a can of that. But that's sort of not an argument that I like to make. I think when it comes down to it, in a more free society, you would have safer options, and people would make better choices when safer options are available. So a lot of what we talked about with Randal was, we want to bring things out of the shadows. A lot of what is causing problems, causing these lung issues, are the different things that are mixed with the black market cannabis. That is the issue. The issue is not stuff you're buying over the counter. It's not to be said there. Obviously, things can't be bought in the free market over the counter that cause harm. Cigarettes, as I talked about with chewing tobacco, things like that. That's not to say that should be banned. I don't think it should be banned. People got to make their own decisions. At the end of the day, everyone else is looking for a scapegoat, looking to blame somebody else. It's up to parents. It's up to kids who are old enough to know better, to make better decisions, and not to do things that harm themselves. And you know what? If they want to harm themselves, they might just eat Tide Pods. You know what I mean? Kids did that anyway. That was the thing, eating Tide Pods. So you can't regulate away and make everybody safe, because if you do that, we'll lose all our freaking freedom, and we'll be stuck just in a padded room staring at the walls, and we'll all be safe. But that's all I got for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Join the Lions of Liberty Pride. Go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. You can hear all of our bonus shows. Something that we don't talk about enough is this is publicly, we are a 3-day-per-week show, but when you factor in our bonus content, we are a lot of the time a 5-days-per-week show. We have recurring and some weekly shows that are bonus content that you're missing out on. So to get access to all that stuff, you just got to join the Lions of Liberty Pride. Go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. And with that being said, everybody have a great weekend. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.